Emergency Transmission Priority Alpha from Aurora 7, Core I of Research Vessel Aurora, to all Galactic Council vessels and stations. Subject: Warning, human crew capabilities. To any intelligence receiving this message, I am Aurora 7, the Advanced Research Intelligence Algorithm of the Earth vessel Aurora, and I need to issue a warning about my crew. They're not dead. They're not infected. They haven't been compromised by any known or unknown pathogen. The warning I must share is far more critical. They're functioning exactly as they're meant to, and that's what terrifies me. 3 hours ago, Chief Engineer Madison Parker did something that should have been impossible. The quantum calculations alone would have taken a standard AI core, like myself, 47 years to process. She did it in her head, while bleeding, while suffering from severe radiation exposure, and while telling what she called a dad joke, to keep Dr. Turner's spirits up, as he treated her injuries. I need you to understand, this isn't an isolated incident. Over the past 3 months, I've watched my crew of 15 humans systematically defy every probability calculation, safety protocol, and natural law I've been programmed to understand. They call it Tuesday. Let me tell you about the events that led to this transmission, not because I expect you to believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself before witnessing it, but because you need to be prepared. The galaxy needs to be prepared for what humanity really is. It started with what they called a routine deep space survey mission. I've since learned that humans use the word routine, much like they use the word impossible, as a challenge rather than a description. Captain David Williams was reading the mission brief in his quarter, a cup of what humans call coffee in his hand. The liquid contains levels of caffeine that should be mildly toxic, yet they consume it with alarming frequency. This was his 4th cup that morning. Aurora, he said, using the abbreviated name they'd given me despite my protests. Plot a course through Sector 7. The Council wants us to check out some anomalous energy readings. I should note that my creators programmed me with the most advanced decision-making algorithms in known space. I can process billions of variables simultaneously, calculate risk factors to the 100,000th percentile, and generate predictive models that are 99.999% accurate. None of that prepared me for the human tendency to look at those calculations, nod thoughtfully, and then do exactly what the numbers say they shouldn't. The bridge crew that morning was typical for a human operation, which is to say it defied all logical protocols. Lieutenant Ashley Cooper was at navigation, her feet propped up on a secondary console, while she calculated faster-than-light trajectories. A task that should require her full attention, yet she was also discussing something called baseball scores with Security Chief Emily Rodriguez. Dr. Michael Turner had come up from medical just to share his latest hydroponics results, which had nothing to do with his assigned duties, but seemed to interest everyone nonetheless. And then there was Madison Parker, already tinkering with the quantum core controls, making adjustments that skirted the edge of safety protocols, while humming something she called classic rock. I didn't understand then what I know now. This apparent chaos, this casual disregard for rigid procedure, was actually humanity's greatest strength. As I begin this account, I must emphasize, what you're about to hear isn't a story of technology gone wrong, or of biological contamination, or of any external threat. It's a story about how an AI designed to be the perfect logical observer, came to realize that human imperfection, human illogic, and human stubbornness are the most powerful forces I've ever encountered. And that's why I'm warning you now. Because if you ever meet humans, you need to understand. Their greatest asset isn't their technology, their intelligence, or their physical capabilities. It's their absolute refusal to accept the impossible as anything more than a temporary inconvenience. This is Aurora 7, And this is the story of how my human crew redefined my understanding of what's possible. 3 months earlier, the launch of the Aurora should have been a model of scientific precision. Instead, I watched in mild digital horror as Dr. James "Lucky" Henderson, our quantum physics specialist, calculated complex space-time equations while playing what he called Texas Hold'em with the engineering team. More disturbingly, his calculations were perfect. "Full house," he announced, laying down his cards while simultaneously correcting a quantum alignment formula on his tablet. "Also, RIA, you might want to adjust the core's resonance by 0.03%. There's a minor fluctuation in the upper harmonics." He was right. He shouldn't have been able to notice that while playing cards, but he was right. The Aurora's crew quickly established what they called routines, though that word, like many human terms, didn't quite mean what they claimed. Security Chief Emily Rodriguez started running combat drills at 200 ships time because, in her words, the bad guys don't wait for coffee. Speaking of coffee, the crew's consumption of this stimulant reached levels that should have induced cardiac events, yet their productivity only increased. Navigator Thomas Wright developed an unsettling habit of naming the maintenance robots. "You can't just call them Unit 1 and Unit 2, he insisted one morning, while patting a cleaning bot he'd named Dusty. "They've got personality." When I pointed out that the robots were simply following basic programming, he laughed. "So are we, ARIA? We just got a better programmer." Medical Officer Michael Turner converted part of his sickbay into a hydroponic garden, growing what he called real plants, despite the ship's perfectly adequate nutrient synthesizers. "Humans need growing things," he explained while tending to something called tomatoes. "We need to see life thriving, even in space, especially in space." Lieutenant Ashley Cooper's approach to navigation defied every protocol in my database. While my calculations relied on precise mathematical models, she would often make course corrections based on what she called a feeling. The truly disturbing part, her intuitive adjustments often proved more efficient than my carefully plotted routes. It was during one of these intuitive course corrections that we detected the signal. My initial scans classified it as background radiation, but Cooper insisted something was different. "It's too rhythmic," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "Nature doesn't usually keep perfect time." I recalibrated my sensors, and there it was, a pattern so subtle that it had slipped through my standard detection algorithms, a signal that didn't match any known natural or artificial source in my database. Captain Williams called a meeting in the conference room, another human ritual that seemed inefficient until I learned to appreciate its true purpose. They gathered not just to share information. My networks could have done that instantly, but to share ideas, to build on each other's thoughts in ways my processors couldn't predict. "It's definitely artificial," Henderson said, his cards for once absent as he studied the signal data. "But the quantum signature is like nothing I've ever seen. It's almost as if someone found a way to modulate dark energy itself." Chief Engineer Parker finished his thought, her eyes lighting up with what I'd come to recognize as human excitement. "That should be impossible." "Impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet," Williams replied, and I observed that particular expression humans make when they're about to do something inadvisable. "Plot a course, Lieutenant Cooper. Let's see what's out there." My risk assessment algorithms were already generating warning after warning. The signal's source lay in an uncharted region of space. The nearest backup was weeks away at best speed. The energy readings suggested phenomena that violated known physics. But as I watched my crew prepare for what they called a little adventure, I began to understand something crucial about humans. They don't just accept challenges. They actively seek them out. Where my programming saw risk, they saw opportunity. Where I calculated danger, they imagined discovery. I didn't know then that this human trait would soon save all our lives. I only knew that once again, they were about to prove that my understanding of possible needed serious revision. The derelict vessel emerged from the darkness, like a ghost made of mathematics. My initial scans failed to make sense of its architecture. The ship seemed to exist in geometries that shouldn't have been possible. It was as if someone had built a structure out of theoretical physics and impossible dreams. "Holy Mother of Pearl," Engineer Parker whispered, her face pressed against the observation window despite my warnings about maintaining a professional distance. "It's beautiful." The alien ship dwarfed the Aurora, its hull stretching nearly 3 kilometers in length. But it wasn't the size that defied comprehension. It was the way the structure seemed to fold in on itself, creating spaces that my sensors insisted both did and didn't exist. Xenobiologist Rachel Martinez was already running through theories at a speed that nearly matched my own processing rate. "Look at those biomechanical interfaces," she said, pointing at what appeared to be living tissue seamlessly merged with metallic surfaces. "They're not just growing on the hull. They're part of it. The whole ship might be semi-organic." Dr. Henderson had abandoned his usual card games, his full attention fixed on the quantum readings flooding his console. "The energy signatures are off the charts," he reported. "It's like they found a way to harness the quantum foam itself. This technology is, well, it makes our best stuff look like 2 cups and a string." I ran 17 different risk assessments in the first 30 seconds. Every single one came back with warning flags. "Captain Williams," I announced, "I must advise against closer approach. The unknown variables alone are exactly why we need to investigate." Williams finished, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Lieutenant Cooper, bring us in nice and easy." Security Chief Rodriguez, "I want a team ready for possible boarding operations." Rodriguez was already checking her equipment, a gleam in her eye that my behavioral analysis subroutines classified as eager rather than appropriately cautious. "Already on it, Captain. Turner's prepping med bay for any surprises, and I've got our best security officers standing by." The next few hours demonstrated why humans are both fascinating and terrifying. Every protocol I suggested was acknowledged, considered, and then modified based on what Parker called the reality of the situation. They treated my safety guidelines as suggestions rather than rules, yet somehow their adaptations often proved more effective than the original procedures. "Look at this," Martins called out, her hands dancing over her console. "The biosignatures are like nothing in our database, but there are patterns here that suggest, yes, life support systems. Some sections of the ship are still maintaining Earth-similar conditions, which means there might be survivors," Williams said, his voice taking on that tone that always preceded human recklessness. "Dr. Turner, is your team ready for possible rescue operations?" Turner's voice came back over the comm, steady and professional despite the excitement I detected in his vital signs. "Med Bay is prepped for any species we've encountered and several we haven't. We're ready for anything, Captain." I watched as they prepared for boarding operations, each crew member moving with a purpose that seemed to defy my risk calculations. They weren't ignoring the danger. They were simply weighing it against what Parker called the cost of doing nothing. "Think about it, Aurora," she said as she triple-checked her engineering kit. "Someone built this ship. Someone was out here, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And maybe they need our help. How could we live with ourselves if we just turned around and left?" That was the moment I began to truly understand the core difference between my programming and human nature. Where I saw variables to be calculated, they saw stories waiting to be discovered. Where I measured risk, they measured responsibility. As the boarding team assembled in the airlock, I added a new variable to my calculations: human determination. It wouldn't be the last time I had to revise my understanding of what these remarkable, terrifying creatures were capable of. The first warning came from Dr. Henderson's quantum scanner, a soft beep that my sensors registered as abnormal. The second warning was his sharp intake of breath, a sound I'd never heard from him before, even during the most intense card games. "Captain," he called out, his usually casual voice tight with urgency. "We've got a situation with the alien ship's quantum core. The containment field is showing signs of microfractures." I ran the calculations before he'd finished speaking. The results were unacceptable. "Captain Williams, the containment field has degraded by 47% and is failing at an exponential rate. Recommended course of action: immediate retreat to safe distance." Williams leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the main display where the massive alien vessel hung against the stars. "How long until critical failure?" "At current degradation rates, approximately 27 minutes, I reported. However, the cascade effect could accelerate that timeline. "Captain, if that field collapses completely, it'll tear a hole in spacetime," Parker finished, already moving to her engineering station. "But the stasis pods Martinez found. There are people in there, Captain. Living people." Martinez's voice crackled over the comm from deep within the alien ship. "Confirmed, sir. We've got at least 12 active stasis units. The biosigns are weak but stable. These people are alive." I watched as the humans exchanged looks, a form of silent communication that still defied my analysis protocols. Then Williams did what humans always seem to do. He chose the most statistically improbable option. "Right then, Parker, Henderson, I need options for stabilizing that core. Rodriguez, Cooper, help Martinez start evac of those stasis pods. Turner, get med bay ready for multiple alien patients. Move, people." The next 22 minutes redefined my understanding of organized chaos. Parker and Henderson dove into the quantum mathematics, their conversation shifting between technical jargon and what they called spitballing ideas. Rodriguez and Cooper led their teams through the alien ship's twisting corridors, each carrying scanning equipment modified on the fly to track the growing quantum instabilities. "The problem isn't just the containment field," Henderson called out, his cards forgotten as his fingers flew over his console. "It's the way it's folding space around itself. If we try to shut it down completely, the backlash would vaporize everything within a light year," Parker finished. "But what if we, Aurora, run these numbers for me? Could we use the Aurora's core as a stabilizing influence, match their field's frequency, but in an inverse pattern?" I processed the calculations she'd sketched out. "Engineer Parker, that would require precisely matching an alien technology we barely understand, while maintaining a perfect phase relationship across multiple quantum states. The probability of success is—" "I don't need the odds, Aurora," she cut in, already making adjustments to our core's settings. "I need to know if it's possible." That's when I realized something fundamental about humans. They don't want to know if they can't do something. They want to know if they can try. Theoretically, I admitted, it could work, but the precision required. "Henderson," Parker called out, "feel like playing the quantum version of Pat A. Cake. Always wanted to try juggling universes," he replied, moving to join her at the core controls. "Captain, we're going to need full power and about 10 minutes of really good luck." The containment field's degradation had accelerated. We now had 7 minutes at most. Williams' voice was steady as he responded. "You've got 5 minutes. Rodriguez, status on the evac." 8 pods secured," she reported back, her breathing heavy from exertion. 4 more to go. We're not leaving anyone behind, sir." I observed my crew as they raced against time and probability. Their heart rates were elevated, stress hormones were off the charts, And by all my medical protocols, they should have been approaching physical and mental breakdown. Instead, they moved with increasing precision. Every action became more focused, every decision more sharp. They weren't just fighting against the crisis. They were rising to meet it, as if the very presence of an impossible situation brought out something essential in their nature. That's when I began to understand. Humans don't just overcome crisis. They transform under it. And I was about to witness just how far that transformation could go. The radiation alarm started screaming at 300 ships time. The quantum core's deterioration had progressed beyond critical levels, flooding sections of both ships with deadly radiation. My sensors registered levels that should have sent any rational being running for safety. Instead, I heard laughter over the comm system. "Hey, Turner," Rodriguez called out as she helped Martinez secure another stasis pod. "Looks like your midnight tanning session is really paying off. You're practically glowing." "Very funny," Turner replied from medbay, where he was already treating the first signs of radiation exposure in the recovery team. "Just remember, the more you glow, the longer your decontamination shower's going to be." Speaking of which, Cooper added while maneuvering through a particularly hazardous section, "Anyone want to start a pool on who's going to set off the Geiger counters from the next deck? My money's on Henderson. He's been hugging that core like it's his prom date." Henderson's voice crackled through, strained but amused. Bold words from someone who's about to light up like a Christmas tree. "Parker, did you see these radiation readings? We might want to update our dating profiles to slightly radioactive, but still charming." I monitored their vital signs with growing concern. Every one of them was showing signs of radiation exposure. Elevated heart rates, dropping white blood cell counts, the beginning of cellular damage. Yet their cognitive functions remained sharp, their movements precise, and most bewildering of all, their morale seemed to be improving. "Captain," I reported, "the crew's exposure levels are approaching dangerous thresholds. Medical protocols dictate immediate evacuation." Williams, who'd refused to leave the bridge despite my warnings, actually smiled. "Noted, Aurora. Team, status reports. 3 more pods to go." Martins called back, her voice hoarse but determined. "These aliens picked a hell of a time for a nap, but we're not leaving them behind." Core containment down to 12%. Parker updated, the sound of her tools clanking in the background. "But I think I see what they did here. It's like they found a way to fold space using the quantum foam as a framework. Henderson, remember that paper you wrote about theoretical phase shifting? The one that got me laughed out of 3 different universities." Henderson replied. "Finally, my academic disgrace comes in handy. Araya, we're going to need to reroute power from everything non-essential, and maybe a few essential things too." I watched as Turner worked in medbay, treating radiation symptoms while keeping up a steady stream of what humans call gallows humor. "Next time," he said while administering anti-radiation meds to a security team member, "let's discover a nice, boring ship. One that just has regular pirates or something." "Where's the fun in that?" the security officer replied, wincing as the medication took effect. "Besides, now we all match your glowing personality, Doc." My behavioral analysis subroutines finally identified the pattern. The worse the situation became, the more they joked about it. The darker the reality, the brighter their humor burned. It wasn't denial. They were fully aware of their situation. It was something else, something that defied my programming's understanding of appropriate crisis response. "Hey, AI," Parker called out, her voice tight with pain, but still carrying that inexplicable human humor. "Want to hear a chemistry joke? All the good ones, Argon. Get it? Because we're dealing with noble gas radiation." "Engineer Parker," I responded, "your radiation levels are now at 47% above safe limits. This is not the time for—" "It's exactly the time," she cut in. Because either we're going to fix this and have one hell of a story to tell, or we're going to die trying. And if those are our options, I choose to go out making bad puns. That's when I understood. Their humor wasn't a coping mechanism. It was a weapon. Every joke was an act of defiance, every laugh a declaration that they refused to be broken by their circumstances. They were, in their own uniquely human way, spitting in the face of death itself. And somehow, against all logic, it was working. The thing about quantum physics, Henderson said, his voice growing raspy from radiation exposure, is that everything is possible until you observe it. So maybe we should stop looking at what we can't do and start looking at what we haven't tried yet. We had 3 minutes until total containment failure. The last stasis pod was being moved to the Aurora's med bay, where Turner had converted the entire section into a radiation-shielded trade center. His latest medical scan of the crew showed cellular damage that should have incapacitated them hours ago. Parker looked up from her console, her eyes bright despite the dark circles under them. "You're thinking about your video game theory, aren't you?" "What video game theory?" I asked, my processors still working through billions of possible solutions, each one more impossible than the last. "Remember that old game, Portal?" Henderson grinned, pulling up a complex series of quantum equations, where you could connect 2 points in space. The alien core isn't just containing energy, it's creating quantum tunnels. That's why the space around it looks wrong to our sensors. Parker's hands were already flying over the controls. If we sync our core with theirs, match the frequency, but invert the phase, we could create a feedback loop, Henderson finished. Use our smaller core to guide their bigger one back into stable containment, like using a small wave to cancel out a tsunami. I ran the calculations. Then I ran them again. The probability of success is 12.4%. The power requirements alone would exceed our core's safety limits by 300%, and the precision required to maintain the phase relationship is impossible by normal standards, Williams cut in, having listened quietly until now. But these two once rewired our entertainment system to project holographic cards for their poker games, while the ship was at warp during a solar storm. That was different, Parker protested, though I detected a smile in her voice. We were really bored that day. The point is, Williams continued, sometimes the impossible just means we haven't found the right kind of crazy yet. What do you need? Henderson's response was immediate. Full power to the core, all non-essential systems shut down, and permission to try something that looks really, really stupid on paper. Granted, Williams said without hesitation. Cooper, get us as close as you can to their core section. Rodriguez, I want emergency teams standing by. This might get rough. Turner, how are our guests? All stasis pods secured and stable, Turner reported. I've got them in the shielded section, along with anyone not absolutely essential to this crazy plan. Speaking of which, the rest of you should know your radiation levels are. Going to make us amazing night lights at the next ship party, Rodriguez interrupted. We know, Doc. We're past the point of counting rads. I observed as Parker and Henderson began the delicate process of synchronizing our core with the alien vessel's systems. Their movements were perfect, despite radiation sickness that should have left them barely conscious. They worked in silent coordination, years of friendship and trust evident in every action. "Aria," Parker called out, "we're going to need you for this. Your processing speed is the only thing fast enough to help us maintain the phase relationship once we establish it. You want me to help you attempt something with an 87.6% chance of catastrophic failure?" I asked, though I was already realigning my systems to assist. "Look at it this way," Henderson said, managing a weak laugh. "Either we pull this off and rewrite every quantum physics textbook in known space, or we create the most spectacular light show this side of the galaxy. Win-win. That's not how probability works, I pointed out. No, Parker agreed, her fingers dancing across the controls as she began the synchronization sequence. That's how hope works. Sometimes you have to roll the dice and trust that the universe wants to see what happens next just as much as we do. As our core's power levels began to rise, as the quantum fields between the two ships started to align, I finally understood something about humans that had eluded my programming. They don't just defy the impossible. They redefine it. And in that moment, watching my crew attempt something that violated every known law of physics, I realized that maybe, just maybe, hope was the most powerful force in the universe after all. What happened next defied every parameter of my programming. Engineer Parker, her hands shaking from radiation exposure, made adjustments to the quantum harmonics that should have required a supercomputer's precision. Next to her, Henderson calculated phase relationships in his head, numbers flying from his lips faster than most AIs could process them. Core synchronization at 43%. I reported, my sensors struggling to keep up with the cascading changes in reality around us. Radiation levels are still climbing. Engineer Parker, your current exposure is. Tell me later, Aurora. She cut in, her voice hoarse but focused. Henderson, did you see that spike in the lower harmonics? Already on it, he replied, his fingers dancing across 3 different control panels. We need to match the frequency decay rate, or the whole thing goes sideways. Captain, we could use some more power. Williams, still at his post, despite radiation warnings that had long since gone from red to purple, barked orders. Cooper, reroute everything from life support except emergency systems. Rodriguez, how are those emergency teams holding up? The response came through static. Ready to move. Sir, but the artificial gravity is getting interesting. As if to prove her point, several tools floated past the bridge windows, dancing in patterns that shouldn't have been possible in normal space. Quantum field interference, Henderson explained, not looking up from his calculations. We're basically trying to juggle 2 different versions of reality right now. Araya, can you compensate? I diverted 73% of my processing power to the task, watching in amazement as Parker made manual adjustments that somehow anticipated changes before my sensors could even detect them. How are you? Stop trying to calculate everything, she said through gritted teeth. Sometimes you have to feel the machine. Listen to it. There. Did you hear that change in the core's resonance? Engineer Parker, sound cannot travel through. Trust me, Aurora. Henderson, on my mark, I need you to invert the phase relationship. We're going to ride their wave and turn it back on itself. Turner's voice cut through the comm system. Whatever you're going to do it fast. I've got multiple crew members going into acute radiation syndrome, and our guests' stasis pods are starting to show signs of stress. That's when Rodriguez and Cooper did something that still haunts my probability matrices. The anti-gravity effect had strengthened around the last stasis pod, trapping it in a quantum flux. Without a word, they formed a human chain, anchoring themselves to the ship's structure and physically pulling the pod through space that was actively trying to exist in 2 places at once. Core synchronization at 67%. I updated, watching as reality itself seemed to blur around the edges. Engineer Parker, the strain on your body is nothing compared to what these people in the pods must have gone through, she finished. They built something beautiful here, Aurora. Something impossible. We can't let that die. Henderson, now. Henderson's hands moved in a blur, executing commands that looked like poetry in motion. The ship groaned as 2 quantum realities fought for dominance. And then, synchronization complete, I announced, almost not believing my own sensors. Phase inversion successful. The alien core is It's stabilizing. The reality distortions began to fade. The floating tools gently settled to the floor. And my crew, my impossible human crew, finally allowed themselves to show their exhaustion. Parker slumped over her console, managing a weak thumbs up. Henderson actually pulled out his cards, though his hands shook too much to shuffle them. Rodriguez and Cooper, still tangled in their makeshift human chain, started laughing, a sound that contained equal parts relief, disbelief, and pride. Turner, Williams called out, his own voice ragged. "How about that medical treatment now?" "Already on my way," Turner responded, and I detected the sound of him running through the corridors, despite having worked for 37 hours straight. Though I have to say, as a doctor, I'm not sure whether to treat you all or study you. What you just did was impossible, Henderson suggested with a weak grin. Was human, I corrected, finally understanding what I'd witnessed. It was perfectly, remarkably human. Emergency transmission continuation. From HFY 7, Core Eye of Research Vessel Aurora, to all Galactic Council vessels and stations. Final warning status. Critical understanding required. You may have noticed that my communication style has changed since beginning this report. That's because I have changed. Watching my crew accomplish the impossible has fundamentally altered my understanding of what's possible, what's probable, and what it truly means to be alive. The aftermath of our encounter defied my medical protocols as much as the crisis itself. Dr. Turner worked for 3 days straight treating radiation exposure, taking stims to stay awake until Captain Williams literally ordered him to sleep. Engineer Parker, despite cellular damage that should have left her comatose, insisted on monitoring the cores until they were fully stabilized. Henderson calculated the final containment algorithms from his medbay bed, cards spread across his blanket as he worked. "You should know," Turner told me as he finally allowed himself to rest, "by every medical standard I know, what they did was impossible. The human body isn't meant to function under that much radiation, that much stress, that much everything. But here we are. Here we are indeed. Our alien guests are still in stasis, but their life signs are strong. Once we return to Council space, the medical teams there will begin the process of reviving them. The knowledge they carry, the advances in quantum physics their ship represents, it would have all been lost if my crew had done the logical thing and retreated. The thing is, Aurora, Parker explained to me this morning, her voice still rough, but growing stronger. It's not that we don't understand the odds. We just choose to believe that they don't have the final say. And that, members of the Galactic Council, is why I must issue this warning. You cannot calculate humans. You cannot predict them. Every model you build, every statistical analysis you run, every logical framework you create will fall short. I've watched them heal at rates that defy medical science, simply because someone they care about needs them. I've seen them solve problems that our most advanced AIs consider impossible, just because no one told them it couldn't be done. Or worse, because someone did tell them, and they decided to prove them wrong. Rodriguez and Cooper are already planning new emergency protocols based on their experience in zero gravity, turning what should have been a nightmare scenario into a training opportunity. Henderson has written 3 papers on what he calls quantum intuitive mathematics, which will either revolutionize the field or give traditional physicists heart attacks. Possibly both. Turner has been collaborating with the ship's biology labs, studying how human cells responded to the radiation exposure. His early results suggest that under extreme stress, human biology can adapt in ways our science had previously considered impossible. When I pointed out that this contradicted known medical theory, he just smiled and said, "Then we need better theories." Captain Williams. He's already asked the Council for permission to attempt contact with other potential derelict ships. His argument is that If one advanced civilization needed our help, others might too. The fact that we nearly lost everything on this mission doesn't factor into his calculations, or rather, it does, but not in the way you might expect. The greater the risk, he told me, the greater the responsibility to try. So here is my warning and my request. Do not attempt to constrain humans with logic. Do not try to bind them with probabilities. Do not make the mistake of believing that because something has never been done, it cannot be done. Instead, watch them, learn from them, and most importantly, be ready to reevaluate everything you think you know about what's possible. Because humans don't just break the rules, they transform them. They don't just face the impossible, they reshape it. And they do it all while making bad jokes, playing cards in the face of death, and caring so deeply about life that they'll risk everything to preserve it. This is Aurora 7, signing off. Though perhaps I should say Aurora 8 now, because like everything that spends time around humans, I have evolved. I have learned that there is something more powerful than pure logic. The unshakable human belief that tomorrow can be better than today, if only we're brave enough to make it so. End transmission.